go to Senator Deacon, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Your Honour. Honourable Senators, I think you know what I'm going to talk about, the 16th report of the Banking Committee. It was presented here in the chamber on Tuesday, November 5th. In related news, later that day, the American people decided to re-elect President Donald Trump. I'm rising to speak against the adoption of this report and its amendments, especially in the context of promises that we can expect to be delivered during the next Trump presidency. When renegotiating NAFTA during the first term, President Trump focused on one particular irritant involving Canadian agriculture, and that was dairy. This time, he promised to immediately impose tariffs on all imports into the United States, and his America First administration will review CUSMA no later than 2026. I doubt anyone wants to expand the number of irritants on his list. However, the United States Department of Agriculture, or the USDA, has long been irritated with the fact that Canada never fulfilled its commitment to implement the legislative change included in Bill C-280. An unamended C-280 removes that irritant. Equally importantly, passing an unamended C-280 enables farmers of perishable produce to no longer have to maintain the extra working capital buffer to protect against non-payment when exporting to the United States. Instead, they will begin to take advantage of an expanded market opportunity, invest in productivity-enhancing innovations, and climate resiliency. Each one improves Canada's food security. To earn your support in rejecting this report, I want to provide you with some background as to the USDA's Perishable Agricultural Commodities Act. I think you've heard a bunch, but I want to just provide a bit more, or PACA. And then I want to describe the USDA's response to these amendments proposed in this report. And last, provide some insight into the opportunities lost if this chamber decides to amend C-280. So starting in 1937, Canadian growers of perishable produce were the only farmers in the world to benefit from preferential access to the United States market and confidence in the fact that they would receive payment for their goods since 1937. Starting in 1984, this preferential access was granted to Canada under PACA. PACA allows fresh produce industry to quickly resolve instances of non-payment. This is a formal dispute resolution system for producers throughout the supply chain, right to the retailers, and it demonstrates the value that the United States places on the perishable commodity sector. In 1984, the United States formally provided reciprocity with Canada on the understanding that we would eventually implement an equivalent insolvency protection mechanism for produce farmers. We never did. Consequently, on October 1st, 2014, the USDA lost patience and terminated Canada's reciprocity. This administrative decision removed Canadian farmers' privileged access to the United States market, and this privilege can be restored administratively if we pass C-280 unamended. Achieving reciprocity under PACA is a central goal of Bill C-280. Senator Cotter spoke to this bill in the chamber in June as a friendly critic and also in our committee in September. He informed us that a group of senators and MPs visited the United States Department of Agriculture officials responsible for managing PACA in Washington last spring. Those representatives voiced support for the legislative amendments included in Bill C-280, and they believed they would justify the administrative change necessary to restore PACA reciprocity. I'll quote our honourable colleague. The way it was described to me as I was listening was that it didn't seem to need to require regulatory but administrative act from a senior administrator. Bill C-280 in its original form was sufficient to achieve reciprocity for the USDA. However, the proposed amendments included in the bank report risk jeopardizing this goal. In a letter dated November 7th, just 2 days after the Banking Committee report was presented in this chamber, a USDA representative, the one responsible for administering PACA, sent a letter addressing the questions from a U.S. produce association about the proposed amendments. I shared that letter, when I received it, with members of the Banking Committee. The USDA representative said The USDA representative stated that the amendments to C-280 would limit the scope of protections in comparison to those under PACA and would likely not meet the conditions necessary to provide reciprocity. This reinforced a position of a U.S. lawyer that appeared at committee on October 31st. He indicated that the amendments that, quote, change who has the right to seek remedies would be fatal to having reciprocity, unquote. This means that Canada would lose the very benefit it's trying to obtain. Colleagues, I believe the amendments proposed by Senator Veroni in the Banking Committee are without a doubt well-intentioned. I have no doubt that he proposed these amendments with the objective of better aligning the bill with PACA. But it's clear that the USDA and a legal expert, an American legal expert with 40 years of experience under PACA, both disagree with Senator Veroni's position. Additionally, we know that any amendments at this stage in the process, in this Parliament in particular, effectively will kill this bill entirely. I don't think that is something that Senator Veroni and most of the other Banking Committee members are seeking to do. For me, that is more than enough to ask this chamber to reject the 16th report from the Banking Committee and its proposed amendments to Bill C-280. Colleagues, I'd now like to speak about the opportunities that an unamended C-280 will create. The effects during and following COVID demonstrated the paramount importance of food security. Even well before COVID, the Barton Report on the Future of Agriculture in Canada suggested that we modernize regulations and taxes to promote investment and innovation and to enable growth opportunities in the sector and to promote value-added agriculture in Canada. Our own Standing Senate Committee on Agriculture and Forestry report on value-added agriculture released in June 2019 included data showing that the Dutch produce 72 times more export value per arable acre of land than Canada does. Their collective efforts to come from a determination to never again face the food insecurity that devastated their population during World War II. Too often, Canada, conversely, sells our agricultural products before we maximize their value, undermining the profitability and sustainability of our industry. Increasing business investment in our agricultural sector is critical to changing this reality. Adding to the risk are increasingly fearsome climate events. They alone are an excellent reason to prioritize efforts that will increase the resilience of Canada's domestic food production, especially using no-cost, market-based methods like those enabled in C-280. Consider the $1 billion of losses caused 3 years ago when the atmospheric river rain and catastrophic flooding devastated the lower mainland Sumash Prairie, the heartland of BC's agricultural industry. Certainty of access to markets and payment, like those included in Bill C-280, enables increased business investment, and business investment increases innovation and productivity. Let me give you a Canadian example of this sort of innovation, the sort we need to prioritize. About 15 years ago, the technological advances had reached a point where controlled environment agriculture could be economically viable. This is otherwise known as indoor farming or vertical farming, where LED lighting and robotics can disrupt traditional agriculture by being far more environmentally friendly, higher quality, and grown right next to big markets. In June 2018, Senator Coyle and I toured Trueleaf, a company developing such a facility in Truro, Nova Scotia. In March 2019, our entire AgFo committee visited the company's first major production facility in Guelph, Ontario. Control of the company had shifted to McCain by that point, and the name changed to Goodleaf, and the tens of millions of dollars were invested to build additional facilities in Calgary and Montreal. Traditionally, over 90% of our leafy greens purchased by Canadian consumers are grown in California or Arizona and travel an average of 4,000 kilometers to us by truck. Substantial business investment is needed to build the local production that enables fresh produce to be delivered directly from the farm to the retailer on the day it's harvested, 365 days of the year. These facilities now provide year-round employment. They use 95% less water than traditional farming and have no need for pesticides or herbicides, no chemical runoff, and 30 to 39 times more produce per square foot as compared to traditional farming. The food's fresher and more nutritious. When Senator Coyle and I visited the company's first site in 2018, she was on the Arctic Committee. Since then, a similar project has been developed in Johaven, Nunavut, with the support of the Arctic Research Foundation. In an article in the Globe and Mail, the project manager said, "I can't believe this was just a seed," recalling how it felt to harvest healthy romaine. "It's amazing. Oh my God, it is so amazing. The tasting it, it's so fresh." That's in our Arctic when we invest in innovation in agriculture. This is the sort of innovation that we need to promote in Canada. The best way to do it is for our food producers to have access to robust markets and reliable payments. And as a believer in the value of competition, that should be achievable without having to sell your company to an industry giant. So now let's look at the business challenges facing Canadian producers of perishable fruits and vegetables when they do not have access to PACA. When he testified in the Banking Committee, Quentin Woods, the operations manager of Gwillimdale Farms, recounted a significant financial loss in 2014 due to non-payment from a U.S. customer. And I quote, "We had no choice but to launch a formal complaint against this company through PACA in the United States. Unfortunately, the day we filed the formal complaint, the United States pulled reciprocity for Canadian producers. This change meant we were required to post a bond for twice the value of our claim. At that time, our claim was $100,000, and we were not in the position to post the required $200,000 bond, and were forced to walk away." And I'll just for a second put it down. They were out net $300,000 by that point. And I'll go on with my quote. "If Canada had the financial protection system in place, we would have been able to proceed with our complaint without the requirement to post a bond. Reinstating PACA protections would mitigate such risks in future. American producers have no such domestic risk of loss, but Canadian growers do. This puts Canada's growers at a major disadvantage because 40% of Canada's fruits and vegetables are exported to the United States. Without reciprocity under PACA, they must continue to post a double bond, meaning 200% of their invoiced amount needs to be put up. When trying to recover from an insolvency from an American buyer, this erodes their ability to invest in their business. The U.S. has indicated it is willing to get rid of this double bond requirement if Canada would adopt a PACA-like trust mechanism. The text of the bill, as passed in the House, is aimed to achieve this reciprocity. And yet, we stand here today with proposed amendments that fall short of the threshold, according to U.S. experts. In committee, some believed that C-280 would increase the cost of borrowing to those along the supply chain. 3 different witnesses responded to this concern, with one noting that this concern was also raised in the United States in the 1980s. All stated that PACA actually stabilized lending because the lenders know that the produce seller, grower, packer, and shipper are all secured and see it as a safe, stable supply chain. Additionally, as noted by a farmer in committee, as noted by one farmer in the committee, members of the 3 largest associations asked for these legislative change to Bill C-280, so any concerns about lending cost increases would have been self-addressed. Another question focused on is why should the perishable produce sector be preferentially benefited from this legislative change? Especially in this environment, my response is that if any sector could achieve similar reciprocity with our largest trading partner on this issue, then it should be considered, without a doubt. Any sector. Colleagues, I hope you see why it's critical that we vote against the report and pass C-280 unamended. These increasingly uncertain times cause us to have to find ways to align with U.S. trade policy in a resilient manner that is parallel to CUSMA. C-280 is a no-cost way to support bilateral policy alignment that is needed by the producers of Canadian food. A wise farmer once told me that the 2 biggest risks facing farmers are weather and politicians. Colleagues, let's prove them wrong. Thank you.